This is a repeat after me song. This is a repeat after me song. There you go, and a do as I do song. Remember, repeat after me, okay? Flee. Fly, fly. Oh my gosh, I messed it up already. Flee, fly. Flee, fly, flow. La vista. Cumalada, cumalada, cumalada vista. There you go. Oh, no, 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 not La vista. Eeny, meeny, decimini, ooh-wada, wada, meeny, examini, zalamini, ooh-wada, wah. Oh, crushed it. A big belly, oh, bo, 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 ba, eatin', nada, ah, chihuahua, yeah! That's great. Who is just utterly confused? What did you just walk into this morning, right? You're like, especially new guests, you're like, did I just come to a cult? Yeah, that's exactly how I felt my first day at training for Spring Hill camps. Summer right after I graduated high school, this is 2012, I'm a freshly insecure senior who just is trying to figure out how to make his life work post-high school, and I get my first job as a camp counselor summer of 2012 at Spring Hill Camps. It's this huge camp that's based in Michigan, Indiana, with a number of day camps all across the Midwest. And so on my first full day of training, myself and like all of us other newbie counselors are just sitting in a room waiting for something to happen when all of a sudden these crazy people just burst through the doors and they just start going, I don't know, like just crazy all around us, and they start singing these repeat after me songs. And I'm like, what the heck did I just sign up for? I was so overwhelmed. And it turns out that's exactly why we had training. Not only to figure out how to be a good camp counselor, not only to learn how to run the activities for the summer, to make sure that it's efficiently done, that they're done safely, and especially to teach the gospel to kids, we also learned the purpose of these repeat after me songs. Because it turns out they're really amazing ways to keep your kids entertained as you walk from one place to the other, or if you have some downtime after activities, you just do these repeat after me songs, and man, they just keep kids locked in. And then it all made sense. These ridiculous repeat after me songs actually served a higher purpose, but I had to be trained to learn that. Otherwise, I would have been completely lost, completely confused, and I would have wanted to drop out. And the point is that we need training to do anything well. We need training to do anything well. It's why we have new staff orientation whenever you sign on to a new job. It's why we have training wheels for bicycles. It's why we follow recipes for the new food item that you want to cook until you can get good enough where you don't even have to use the book. It's why we take lessons to get better at playing saxophone. It's why we need training until we're comfortable enough to sing these camp songs in front of hundreds of kids. Right? We need training because our brains just need constant habits of repetition and learning the higher purpose behind our actions whenever we do anything new. That's how we get better, and it is often done at the hands of other people who are more skilled, who've gone before us to teach us these things, right? And it turns out the exact same thing applies to our life with Jesus. We need training to live a life with Jesus. Because if we don't get that training, we often feel confused, misunderstood. We kind of wonder if we just signed up for a cult. And that is why discipleship is so important. We're in week 2 of our current sermon series called Lost Cause. Just a few weeks ago, we celebrated Easter, which is when our Savior and King Jesus rose from the dead to conquer sin and death so that we might be unleashed to live a life with God, both for eternity, but also here on this earth. And also, that means that we are sent out on the lost cause. In other words, the cause to save the lost, for those who don't know Jesus to come and find him so that they can live that vibrant life that God has intended for them. And last week, as I mentioned, we talked about the importance of evangelizing to others. And that's not just sharing your faith with people, but it's just simply the act of inviting them to come and see what God is doing. Whether that's here at church, whether that's with you and your friend group, or whether that's even just with your own life. Invite our friends to come and see what God is doing. But when they come here, and when they start getting interested in Jesus, what's the next step? Because the next step is crucial if we don't want people to leave confused and just at a loss for what they might have signed up for. That's covered in discipleship. So Jesus gives some really famous last words before he deuces out and heads up to heaven in Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. If you have a Bible, you can flip over there to the first gospel, or the first book of the New Testament. It's the last chapter of the first book of the New Testament, Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And here's what Jesus says. Jesus came and told his disciples that I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Those are his famous last words. And so we're going to really dig deep into three key phrases from Jesus' parting words to his disciples for us to understand this next step in the lost cause. Okay? So the first phrase is, all authority has been given to me. The second phrase is, make disciples. And the third is, to go. Okay? Those are the first three steps. Let's dive into the first one. All authority has been given to me. Jesus just rose from the dead. He is Lord. He is God. Right? Therefore, he has a pretty good track record of commanding what he ultimately wants to see happen, right? Like, we cannot argue with what Jesus wants. And of all the things that he uses to practice his authority over, is that he commands us to make disciples. That's really kind of the first thing that we need to grapple with, is that Jesus commands discipleship. And the question that I'm left asking is, why would he make this command the first thing he does when he's been granted all of this authority over heaven and earth as God? Right? Instead of just snapping his fingers and saving everybody so that they all come to know him, he sends his followers out to make disciples. Surely there's a more efficient strategy, right? And further, like, why would this process of discipleship, still even apply to us today, 2,000 years later? So this is where we need to start. Because it turns out, if we want to ever figure out exactly like what the church should do today in its modern context, what really helps for us to know how to move forward is actually by looking backward and understanding exactly what the early church did way back in the day. So, first, we need to define what is a disciple. Formally, a disciple is a learner or follower, usually someone committed to a significant master. In other words, probably the best word to really accurately translate disciple to our modern context is an apprentice. Where are my Star Wars fans at? Yeah, y'all know the process, right? If you want to become a Jedi Master, what do you have to start as? An apprentice. Yes, you got to start as a Padawan. You are a student, and you work your way up, right? So you don't just get a lightsaber on day one. You got to earn your keep. You got to be trained into this, right? So Qui-Gon Jinn, he's training up his Padawan, his apprentice, Obi-Wan, who eventually passes the Jedi trial so that he can become a Jedi Knight, and then he becomes a Jedi Master and ultimately takes on his new apprentice, Anakin Skywalker, which we all know how well that ends, right? But it's this process of transferring knowledge and skills to people who follow you. That's the essence of discipleship. In fact, it came hundreds of years even before Jesus was in the picture from ancient Greek history. Discipleship was the passing of wisdom to the young for character formation specifically. And when we get into the Hebrew and Israelite tradition, so this is the people of God that we read in the Old and New Testaments, rabbis were just the religious teachers of their day, would have students called talmidim. That's Hebrew for taught ones, students. Got a lot of students here in here. We've all been students, and technically we're all still students of life, right? We know what this looks like. The Hebrew equivalent of a disciple are these taught ones who strive to become rabbis themselves by learning under their guidance, okay? And what is very crazy, when you look at the relationship between rabbi and disciple, there was no other relationship quite like it. Because disciples would literally follow their rabbis everywhere they went. Everywhere. They would sleep in the same place as them, they would travel with them, they would eat with them, they would all to just soak up not only their teachings, but how they do life, everything. Because they want to mimic the life of their rabbi. So just imagine following your professors everywhere they went. You're like, I didn't sign up for that. But that was the essence of discipleship in the first century, during Jesus' day. But what's particularly startling about discipleship in Christ's day is that discipleship was reserved for the best and brightest religious students, okay? Everyone in that culture had to go through basically like elementary and high school of like learning the Old Testament. Everyone in that culture would learn the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They would memorize it. And then most of those people would just graduate, so to speak, and they would go on to be fishermen and carpenters and farmers and just, they'd enter the workforce, right? But then the best of those students would go on to the next level of education, which was kind of like college, where they would literally learn the rest of the Old Testament. They would memorize it, all like 40-some books of the Old Testament. Crazy, right? They would memorize it and they become really, really fluent in it. But then the best of the best of the best of those students would go on to apply under these rabbis with the goal of becoming rabbis themselves, right? So then they would follow them. It basically belonged to a very prestigious group of people. And finally, when the disciple learned everything they could from the rabbi would turn to them and say, "Congratulations, son, you made it. Now go and make disciples." See? So then the process continues on. But for the average working class, the average Joes in that culture, they never stood a chance to experience this form of discipleship, this form of prestigious, deep learning under the yoke, under the teaching of a rabbi. And yet, when you look at the Gospels, who does Jesus invite to be his disciples? Average old Joes, fishermen, farmers, tax collectors, prostitutes, drunkards, sinners, people who stood no chance in actually getting into a formal discipleship relationship, apprenticeship under a rabbi, or Jesus' disciples. Pretty wild, huh? So you can imagine how flabbergasted they would be when at the end of their life, or at the end of Jesus' life, right before he ascends back up to heaven, and he gives them these final words, "Now you go and make disciples, because you are essentially, you average old Joe, a rabbi." It just didn't compute for them. But what this means for all of us is that the command to make disciples, the command to form apprentices in the way of Jesus, is always for the ordinary. If you don't think you're good enough, if you don't think you're mature enough to pour into someone else for their faith or to help them grow in the way of Jesus, congratulations, you fit the perfect mold for who Jesus wants to apprentice and to apprentice others. We're all capable of it. Further, the reason why God commands this to be true is because discipleship is the most efficient method for life transformation. It's the most efficient method for life transformation. The reason why training under other people is so effective is because you're able to just ask questions. You're able to observe their way of life, right? One of my favorite phrases is that you are who you're with. The people we surround ourselves with the most are the ones who form us the most. So imagine us hanging around mostly and just diving into these practices with Jesus, together. It becomes a really powerful way for us to transform our lives and to live his way accordingly, right? So that's why he commands it. And it still applies to us in a lot of ways today. So from that authority, for us to, follow what Jesus says, he gives us 2 other commands, to go and make disciples. So for all you type A people, I'm going to mix it up on you. We're going to talk about making disciples first. And then we'll come back and cover the go part. So what does it mean to make disciples? What does it mean to make disciples? One of the things that we need to understand about discipleship is that it matures faith, okay? Discipleship matures faith. This apprenticing together according to the way of Jesus, it matures our faith. In other words, you're not meant to do this Christian life alone. You can't do it alone. You can only get so far until you can have the body of believers, others around you, to push you and spur you forward in ways that you couldn't. It matures us in deep, deep, deep ways. And here's how it does, okay? I'm curious, how many of us here have kids? Very few of us. Who here who wants to have kids someday, okay? If there's anything you ever need to know about raising kids, so for those, especially students here who are like, oh, what am I going to sign up for someday? It's really hard. It's really messy, and it's really inefficient, okay? Can you just imagine having someone from the day they're born where you literally have to teach them everything about what it means to be a functioning adult? And I'm not just talking about how to be a civil person who has, good banter with other people. I'm talking you got to teach them how to eat. You got to teach them how to walk. You got to teach them how to stand. You got to teach them how to not stick their fingers in outlets. What? This is just normal stuff for us, right? Well, it's because we got to walk alongside them because they just don't know what they don't know, right? And it helps them mature. And likewise, it doesn't just help them mature, but it helps us as the parent mature too. Let me tell you, I thought I was a patient person until I met my impatient daughter, and it pulled out the impatience in me. I thought I'm a pretty chill dude. You might think, oh, Jake never gets angry. Oh, man. You haven't seen me at bath times when, it's bad sometimes. When things don't go exactly how you want, it tests me. And then I realize, dang, I'm not near as virtuous as I thought I was. And immediately it becomes the playground, the laboratory, and training this little human to become a better person, I'm also becoming a better person. That's the case with anything. You could be an 11-year-old who loves basketball, and you want to train one of your other good friends to get better at basketball. And not only are you helping them learn better skills, but it's also solidifying your skills as an 11-year-old basketball player, right? Or if you're really into doing electrical work and you want to teach someone one of your friends who's curious to learn more, right? You teach them the skills, but you also get better at your craft and teaching it. If you're trying to teach a new employee how to use the databases and how to process, all their procedures and stuff, it also helps you get better at what you do too. It goes back and forth. You're not just helping those who are behind you, it's also helping you get better at what you do too. So the point in all that is you might think you don't have what it takes to make a disciple, to train others into the way of Jesus. But all you need is to be one step ahead of the people you're discipling. You might think well, yeah, Jake, of course, I'm an expert at playing saxophone. I'm an expert at making coffee. I'm an expert at pickleball. I can teach people how to do those things all day, but when it comes to my faith in Jesus, that's just so much more serious of a thing. We just get so insecure about pouring into others for the purpose of their faith, right? And you're not wrong. Our life with Jesus is a weightier thing to process than playing pickleball, I think Jesus would love pickleball if he were around. But still, we automatically discount ourselves because we think we have to have a professional degree in ministry, or that the pastor is the one who's, people often think that discipleship is meeting with your pastor over coffee to learn all the things you don't know. But that's so far from the truth. Despite your insecurities, as long as you are just one step ahead of whoever is behind you in their faith journeys, they will look to you as an expert, whether you want to or not. We're all very aware of our insecurities, but they don't know that. They just see that you believe something that they don't. You have a way of life that they want to have. They want to learn from you and what you do know. They don't care if you don't know everything. They just care that you know something. Because of that, we can actually take this on and to walk alongside others for them to grow in the way of Jesus, for them to become stronger followers. Whether that's you pouring into them directly, whether that's you getting a group of 3 to 5 people to do this. right? That's what this entails. So that leads to the question then, how do we make disciples? What does that actual process look like? At the risk of being incredibly simplistic, because again, it's a way of life, it's a rubbing of shoulders through everything you do, here's just a couple of things, a couple of quick tips and tricks. If you want the BuzzFeed article of like how to make disciples, here are your top 5 things, okay? The first thing you need to do is to live faithfully yourself. Again, you don't have to be an expert in Christianity or the spiritual life, but you do need to live a faithful life to Christ's teachings yourself. You can only teach what you know. So we're going to talk a lot more about this next week. We're really excited about it. It's going to be awesome. But it just further emphasizes, like, we also need to make sure we're coming to church consistently. We're at least trying to read Scripture when we can. We're dabbling around in prayer. Like, we're practicing these things. And that we're trying to live an aligned life between what we profess and what we live out, right? So it just kind of holds us accountable to make sure that as we're pouring into other people with this stuff, we're living it out our own too, right? So that's the first thing. Live faithfully yourself. The second thing is to invite someone to be discipled. Do not wait for someone to ask you to be discipled, because often the people who would want to be discipled don't know that they need to be. Is there someone in your life, just one name even, that pops up in your head where you can be like, I'm curious if they want to learn a little bit more about Jesus, and just for us to talk about the way of Jesus together? One person. Does even a name come up to your mind? Chances are we can think of at least one person, and then it's just a matter of asking, hey, would you mind working with me to just learn what it looks like to be a better follower of Jesus? It's not saying that you have all the answers, right? But that you almost get to shape each other. This could be like one-on-one. It could be a group of friends that you just want to say, like, hey, we hang out a lot. We both go to church. Like, we all go to church. Like, why not get serious about this together? Make the invitation, okay? So that's number 2. Then number 3, you got to find a consistent time, because otherwise it's just all well-meaning and, a good idea until you can get it locked into your schedule. A mantra I live by is that if it's not scheduled, it doesn't get done. Schedule it, and it will get done. So people who don't live by calendars, get a calendar or something. Or type A people, all you time-sensitive people, text your non-time-sensitive people and make sure that they follow up with this, right? Find a time where you can meet weekly over coffee, or maybe it's every other week over a lunch, or maybe it's in the evenings where you guys can get together as a small group at your homes or something. Find a consistent time that holds you accountable. When you look forward to that coming up, you just live with a little bit more anticipation that this time together is coming. And that leads to the age-old question. You're living faithfully yourself as best you can. You're curious, about who you've found your people to come with you. You found a consistent time. Then what do you do? Excuse me. What do you do? To put simply, you just discuss the Christian life together. That's really it. And that's very simplistic, because you're like, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? And that's where having different guides or like different curriculums that you can find, even Bible studies, are really helpful, because they kind of basically create the conversation for you. There's a number of different resources. There's a number of different Bible studies. I mean, the classic one is like, let's just open up to a book in the New Testament or something. Let's just read it and talk about, what do we think this means? And how does it apply to our life? And just try to figure it out together. That's the easiest, simplest way to go. Otherwise, you can visit one resource that I highly recommend. It was designed and created by some friends of a church plant in Des Moines. It's so helpful, especially if you're doing this one-on-one, or if you have like a small group of friends you want to work through. It's called discipleship.guide. www.discipleship.guide, and it goes through like 7 different practices of the Christian life that has different video assignments that you get to watch during the week, or like some other practices you get to try, spaces to journal for you to process the stuff during your week, so that then when you come back, you have the basis of your conversation ready to go. Using outside sources like that is so helpful, especially when we don't necessarily know what we could talk about, So I highly recommend that. Discuss the Christian life, especially around a resource. And if you want any other resources, or if you're curious, reach out to me. You can text that church number. You can just write on your Connect cards. discipleship resources and turn it in at the back. I'll follow up with you this week, and I'd love to get you all those different things, okay? Super cool. Moving right along. The fifth and final thing that we'd love to see discipleship do is for disciples to disciple somebody else. Have your disciples disciple somebody else. You might be meeting one-on-one with someone, and they grow to the point where they're like, I can pour into somebody like this. I can reach back and find someone else behind me in their faith journey that I can bring alongside. Even as they're being discipled, they're going to disciple somebody else, who then might disciple somebody else, and then you have this really cool movement that starts to happen. Or even if you're gathering as a group of friends, right? Maybe there's 3 of you, maybe there's 5 of you, whatever, you're really vibing, things are great, you're growing, and you're like, I think we each could do this ourselves. If there's 5 of you in that group, and you branch out, and you each start your own groups of 5, that becomes an exponential curve on a graph and how things double and multiply over time. And that's what leads us to this last command that Jesus gives that we got to talk about. And I'm really serious about this one. It's the command to go. It's the command to go. All authority has been given to me. Go and make disciples. You see, the evangelical church has overcomplicated this word go. We look at Acts 1:8 and we see how Jesus says, you will be my witnesses first in Jerusalem, then to Judea, then to Samaria, then to the ends of the earth. And then we automatically assume what that means is for you to go and make disciples, that you got to go somewhere else. We associate the word and verb go with a location. So the best way to disciple others, for them to know Jesus, is to go to the other side of the state. Go across the nation. Excuse me. Christian, can you hand me my water, please? Or to go to some other country, thank you, some other country across the globe of people who don't even know Jesus, and you got to let them know about it. Because dare you not share about Jesus right where you are, right? Have you noticed that my water bottle is like a walking billboard for all things Resilient Church? You know, let's look at that. It's so funny. We worship Jesus at a pizza ranch. It's great. Go to Jesus has less to do with go to this place and much more about go, it's time to get started. It has nothing to do with go there and much more to do with ready, set, go and make disciples. We got to get started. We've got to get started, especially with those who don't know Jesus. Maybe they think they know Jesus, but they don't truly know Jesus. People who are desperate to have the vibrant life that only Jesus can give. People who are desperate to find community here that the church can provide. Desperate for people to love them no matter where they're at, that, again, the church can and should provide. When you look at the New Testament, the early church blew up not because the church got bigger buildings or because it launched all these other really cool programs. Hardly. The early church exploded because of discipleship movements of inviting people to come and see what God is doing and inviting them into a way of life where they're just simply meeting in homes and they're reading scripture and they're trying to pray and they're trying to figure this out together. That's how the church should grow. And let me tell you, as a new church, right, we're only a year and a half old, we're coming up on 2 years old this August. What God's done in that short amount of time here is amazing, but I would, if I could just make this my free therapy session for a moment, this is why I look forward to this every week. It is so tempting as a pastor of a new church plant to really focus on the stability that numbers bring. If only we can get to a certain size, if we can only get bigger, if we can only see more people coming to our church on Sunday, man, then that's how we know we've arrived, especially because as a church plant, as a new community, you really want to feel stable, that you're going to be able to be here for the long haul, right? That's the trap that's so easy for myself to fall into, but also for all of us. We automatically associate that church growth equals mission. The bigger we get, the more successful we are, but that's not necessarily true. This quote from J.D. Greear in his book, Gaining by Losing, haunts me. When it says that many of the fastest growing churches in America are not growing by winning and discipling new believers, but by importing them from other places and churches. Reshuffling members is not advancing on the gates of hell. It is merely reassigning the soldiers into new platoons. At some point, somebody has to engage the enemy, or we forfeit the war. In other words, that often means that churches get bigger because other churches are getting smaller, because people are just shifting around and going from place to place. There's some truth in needing to find a community that you can call home, especially if you feel like you can grow there. But it's no different from just having a big pitcher of water and taking a bunch of smaller glasses of water and pouring it into the pitcher and saying, look how big our pitcher of water is. But now you have all these other smaller glasses that are empty. We have been praying, and you've heard me talk about it, for us to see a revival take place here in Vermilion, in USD, and our region. And I believe from the Spirit of God that it's going to happen, where we are going to just see people come to faith in droves, and it's going to be crazy to the point where we won't know what to do about it. I believe it's going to happen. But it's not going to happen by just us having a bigger building or trying to invite people from other churches to come here. It's going to happen through discipleship. Through inviting people to come and see what God is doing, meet a community of people who will love them regardless, and invite them into some next step where they can just dive deeper in their faith in God together. That's what it's going to take. And let me tell you, we have no clue how exactly we're going to do that, but we are having really in-depth conversations right now about what does it look like for us as a church to just go all in on discipleship. The apprenticing of each other into the way of Jesus into deeper levels. We want to make that so core and so central. We have some amazing small groups you can sign up for. Jumping into serving teams is a great next step. But the question that haunts me still is, are we making disciples? What does that even mean for us? What does that look like? And so our team are working hard and praying even harder for us this fall to basically come out and say, here's our brand new discipleship strategy, and we're going all in on it. We're pumped out of our minds for what it could look like. And so I'm sharing all this with you so that you can hold us accountable, but also to know we need to make the main thing, and that is the only way of how we're going to be able to form vibrant lives that withstand hardship is for the Spirit of God to descend upon this place, and we invite others to come and know Him this way. So in the meantime, while we're figuring all that stuff out, we're still told to go, to get started. So I'm going to invite our worship team to come on up here as we transition into our final stage of worship today. And my question for us is, what does the next step towards discipleship look for you? And I know we're coming up towards the end of the semester, and a lot of us are going to be gone for the summer, right? And again, we're going to launch a lot of these other efforts in the fall, but still, a couple of ways is just to start building community with other people who love Jesus. If you're interested in hopping on a serving team, that is an amazing first place to start. It's so great. Even though small groups are going to start wrapping up for this spring semester, if you're sticking around for the summer, we're going to have a really awesome 8-week spiritual formation course, basically, where we get to rub shoulders with each other, learn what it means to grow in God, and then we'll be able to come around and dive deep into the fall. But maybe for you, there is that one person on your mind that you've been wanting to ask, and you need to do it. Or maybe there's a group of you who already hang out, and you're like, listen, we come to church together. Why don't we dive deeper into our faith together? And that's your next step. Whatever it is, Sundays alone just don't cut it anymore. I love Sunday morning services. It is a core part of our discipleship, but if that's our only thing and we want to grow closer to Jesus, we need one extra thing, and that's often comes down to rubbing shoulders with other people who believe in Jesus. So if you have other questions about what that even looks like, just fill that out in your card, and we'll follow up with you this week.